Thank you, Avril. Okay, so we're in Gemarah Sanhedrin still, amazingly, and we are on page 12b still. But we may actually get on to 13a today, or we may not quite. Let's have a look. We spoke last week about the very thorny question of whether women count or not in the concept of Tuma and Tahara. If you remember, we spoke about a situation which we've been discussing for the last few weeks, that a korban, a sacrifice, can be brought by the people in a state of impurity if more than 50% of the people are in a state of ritual impurity, are tameh. And the question was, what happens when you have a situation where most of the men are tameh, but most of the women are not? Do the women count in the calculation or not? And we spoke about this last week, and we spoke about the concept of whether women were obligated in the Korban Pesach, because that's what we were really talking about. The question was whether women are obliged to bring the Korban Pesach on their own, or whether they are, as it were, counted in with the household, and whether there was a distinction between the first Pesach, i.e. the one in Nisan, and Pesach Sheni that occurs in Iyar. And that was where we went to last week, and we spoke about the story of Chizkiyahu, who told the people to bring Pesach Sheni, and then had sort of second thoughts about it and asked for forgiveness for doing it wrong. And the question was, what had he done wrong? And we're going to go back to that concept now, because we're over, I'll share the screen with you right now. It's on page 65 for those of you who've got a hard copy Steinsaltz. Should be on the screen any second. There we go. We've got one of our little S symbols, which indicates a new-ish subject. And one of the things that we said that perhaps Chizkiyahu had got wrong, and that's why he felt it necessary to ask for forgiveness, was that he intercalated the year on the 30th day of Adar. Remember that? There was a problem with this, because if you're going to intercalate a year, we have said in the past that really it needs to be done before Purim, so that we don't have two Purims. But b'diavad, in the sort of circumstances afterwards, it can be done right up to the end of Adar. What it can't be done is in the month of Nisan. Once you've entered into Nisan, you've lost the opportunity to intercalate the year and to have an extra month. And the reason for that, we spoke about it in some detail, was the Torah law of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadashim. Nisan has to be the head of the months, has to be the first month. If you intercalate another Nisan, then the second Nisan is not the first month. I know that sounds obvious, but it isn't. The second Nisan is the second month, and you can't have that because that is a Torah law that Nisan has to be the first month. So once Nisan has started, that's it. Your last chance has gone to intercalate the year. So that brings us to the question of the 30th day of Adar, because we know, don't we, that a lunar month is how long? How long is a lunar month? Anyone? Lunar month? How long is a lunar month?
29 days.
29 and a half days. Okay, 29 and a half. Now that half's important, Leon, because that's why some months we have 29-day months, and other months we have 30-day months, because you can't have a 29.5-day month. You can't start the new month midday. You have to start the new month, well, in the middle of the day. You have to start the new month at the beginning of the day. So in order to have 29.5-day month, you have to have some months that are 29 and some months that are 30. Just as a by the way, I'm just going to digress for a minute on that. Johnny Halper, did you see Nathan's post yesterday about the average length of the lunar month? If you didn't, have a look at it. It's very interesting. Rabbi Natan Slifkin wrote a blog yesterday in his Rationalist Judaism blog about how we are told that Rabban Gamliel, who lived around about the 1st century CE, he calculated the lunar month to within about 9 decimal places of that which NASA had calculated recently. Okay, it was incredibly accurate, literally to 9 decimal places, 29.5009376 whatever it was. Crazy accurate. And I remember as a kid being told this as a proof that Chazal, the Chachamim, had supernatural powers, and that they were able to know things that weren't able to be known by natural science. And therefore that proved that the Torah was true. And I remember being told that as a kid. I remember being told it as an adult. Rabbi Slifkin spoke about this in his blog yesterday, because it turns out that actually there's a couple of errors. Number one, the figure that Rabban Gamliel gives, he gives it as the minimum month, the minimum length of a lunar month, because it varies with the speed of the moon. And it turns out that figure actually is the average length of a lunar month, not the minimum. Okay, we can forgive him that little mistake. How on earth did he get it to be so accurate? And doesn't that show that Chazal, our rabbis, have got supernatural powers? Well, it turns out that actually the ancients, even well before Rabban Gamliel, the Babylonians and whoever, a few hundred years earlier, had also calculated this to the same figure, and we just weren't told about that bit. And so it turns out that the Chazal don't have supernatural powers, unless you say that the Babylonians also had supernatural powers. And the whole discussion was about, not really about this topic, although they were using this topic as an example. The discussion was whether you can sell Judaism on the basis of gimmicks like that. Rabbi Slifkin was saying, and quite a few people were agreeing, that once you start doing that, you're on very, very dodgy ground. For example, some of you may remember when the Bible codes came out back in the 80s. I was one of those who was bowled over by the Bible codes. They were seemingly secret codes in the Torah that if you counted certain numbers of letters and skipped certain numbers of patterns, you could find things that couldn't possibly have been known then. Rabin's assassination was one of them that was anyway, it turned out to be a whole load of nonsense, and that it was disproven. And there were a lot of people who were made into Baalei Tshuva as a result of these codes. And then, of course, once it was shown to be nothing more than a mathematical pattern which could be found in Moby Dick or Romeo and Juliet or War and Peace, then it their faith was shattered. So the point that Natan Slivkin was making, and that quite a number of people commented on, including my son, was that don't use gimmicks to sell Judaism. Judaism stands on its own as a value system and a way of life which has infinite value. We don't need gimmicks like that. We don't need to believe erroneously that Rabban Gamliel was some kind of latter-day astronomic prophet and that he had divine intervention to know the average length of a lunar month, because that isn't the case. And if you claim things that aren't the case, what happens when you find out that it's not the case is that your whole argument falls apart. We had this same argument when we were talking about Brit Milah, and there was a time when it was popular amongst Jews, religious Jews, to claim that the reason that we did Brit Milah was because it was healthy and it prevented this disease and it prevented that disease, and it was universally beneficial, and therefore it was that was one of the, how clever the Torah was because of this, that, and the other. Well, the science is not quite as it was presented. There are certain things now which we understand which weren't quite as they were presented. And the bottom line is we do Brit Milah because it's a mitzvah in the Torah, not because it's healthy or unhealthy. And if you go down the health argument, what happens is when you find somebody who'll blow your health argument out the water, then you're in trouble. So don't sell Judaism with gimmicks. That was the message of this. And the average length of a lunar month was used as the example of that in this post. That's how I started to talk about that. So we're talking about a lunar month. It's 29.5 days on average, give or take. And so, of course, the 30th day of a month could be the first day of the next month. It might be the last day of the previous month, but it could be the first day of the next month. So the 30th of Adar, like any 30th, has the potential to either be part of the month of Adar or part of the month of Nisan. Now we know, don't we, because we've just said so, that you're allowed to intercalate the year up to the end of Adar. So up to and including the 29th of Adar, no problem. You can intercalate the year. Better to do it before Purim if you can, but if you have to, you can do it right up to the end of Adar. The 1st of Nisan, you've missed the boat. But what about the 30th of Adar? That's a sort of twilight zone, isn't it? It's nishtahin, nishtaher. It's neither one thing nor the other. Or, more correctly, it could be both. It could be either. So we have to have a discussion about that. And we did. We started this a few lines up. And that's what we're going back to now. Our little symbol on the screen here tells us we're going back to that. And there's the word gufa. Gufa. The word guf means body, right? Ein lo guf ve'ein lo demut haguf. Where do we read that?
Yigdal.
Yigdal, correct. Ein lo guf, God has no body, ve'ein lo demut haguf, and he has no image of a body. So gufa means body, and it means we're going back into the body of the subject. We're returning to the body of the subject. It's a common expression you'll see in Gemarah, gufa. It tells you, right, finish with that we've just said. Now let's go back to what we were talking about previously. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, Ein ma'abrin et hashana b'yom shloshim shel Adar. He says very clearly, Shmuel, that you do not intercalate the year on the 30th of Adar. Why? He tells us why. Hoel v'ra'ui likvo'o Nisan. Because it is fitting. Ra'ui means fitting. It is fitting to be fixed as part of Nisan. In other words, it has the potential to be the 1st of Nisan. And therefore you can't do it because we've already said you're not allowed to intercalate in Nisan. So that's his statement. And then the Gemarah asks a question. Okay, we accept that, but what happens if it did get intercalated on the 30th? Does it count? Ibruha, they intercalated it, they being the Bet Din. They made a mistake, according to Shmuel anyway. They went ahead and they did it anyway. And on the 30th of Adar, they made an announcement that this needs to be a leap year for one of the number of reasons that we have spoken about in the past, that Pesach would be too early if we don't do it. The grains won't be ripe in time. The barley won't be ripe in time for the Omer, and all the other reasons that we spoke about in the previous page. They decide that that needs to happen. We need to make a leap year, and it's the 30th of Adar, and they make that announcement. Asks the Gemarah, what is the halacha? Does it count? Or have they just said nothing? Does it not count? And now we have a discussion, a machloket, a disagreement between two rabbis, Ula and Rava. Amar Ula says, Ein makadshin et achodesh. So what they do is they do not officially announce the month. Okay, they normally what would happen is if the 30th of Adar was going to be Rosh Chodesh, in other words, Adar was going to be a 29-day month and the 30th was going to be Rosh Chodesh, the Bet Din would have to make an announcement. They would have to do Kiddush HaChodesh. They would sanctify the new moon. They would announce the new moon. We spoke about it a few months ago when we were learning that, how they did it and who was allowed to do it. Only the sanhedrin was allowed to do it. And then if they didn't do it, if they didn't do that, what happened? What happens if they didn't do that? They didn't sanctify the month. Does Adar carry on indefinitely? Go on, Michael.
No, it can't.
No. So what happens is the 31st of Adar automatically becomes the 1st of Nisan. You can't have more than a 30-day month in a Hebrew month, in a lunar month. So if you announce the new month, in other words, you announce Rosh Chodesh to be the 30th of that month. In other words, Adar the 30th doesn't exist this year. The day after the 29th of Adar is the 1st of Nisan. You make that announcement as the Bet Din. That is called Kiddush HaChodesh. You have sanctified the month. It's starting today. So let's say Sunday was the 29th of Adar. And on the 29th of Adar, they make an announcement. Tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. So the 30th of Adar doesn't exist, and it becomes the 1st of Nisan. So on the morning of the 30th of Adar, if they can still do Kiddush HaChodesh, and they can turn the 30th of Adar into Rosh Chodesh. Right, no problem. Except that if they're intercalating a year, they can't do that, can they? Because then they will have intercalated on the 1st of Nisan. So what they do is they don't announce the new moon, which means that automatically the following day is Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, it turns out retrospectively that the 30th of Adar was in fact the 30th of Adar and not the 1st of Nisan. So therefore, when they did the intercalation, it was in Adar and not in Nisan. Is everybody with the logic there? Okay. So that's Ulla's explanation of what happens if they mistakenly intercalated the year on the morning of the 30th of Adar. Normally, if they wanted to make it Rosh Chodesh, they would make it Rosh Chodesh, but now they don't. And so the intercalation therefore occurred on the 29th, and it occurred on the 30th of Adar, which is still Adar, and the 31st of Adar becomes the 1st of Nisan. That's Uller's way out of it. Quite clever, really, because then it's showing by not sanctifying the new moon, you are showing that today, the day that I did the intercalation, was actually still Adar. Very nice. So now the Gemarah asks another question, and he says, what if you've got a really dopey bet din? Okay, not only did they intercalate the year on the wrong day, on the 30th of Adar when they weren't meant to, they then went ahead and sanctified the moon on that day when they shouldn't have done it. They're really hopeless, this bet din. Everything they do is wrong. Now what happens, says the Gemarah. Now what you're going to do, because it turns out that the day that they intercalated was not the 30th of Adar, because there was no 30th of Adar, because the silly so-and-sos went and made the 30th of Adar into the 1st of Nisan. And so it turns out that their intercalation took place on the 1st of Nisan. Well, you can't do that, not allowed. So what is the halacha now in this situation where you've got this dopey bet din? And now we've got a discussion between Rava and Rav Nachman. Amar Rava, Rava says, Batel ha'ibur. The intercalation is cancelled. By doing that, it shows that it's no use. It can't work. It's cancelled. The intercalation doesn't take place, and the month carries on as Nisan. It does not become Adar Sheni, Adar Bet, which makes sense, really, because you have gone on ahead and said, today is the 1st of Nisan. Oops, no, it isn't. Today is the 1st of Adar Bet, the 2nd Adar, because I'm intercalating a year. It doesn't make any sense. So Rava's psak, that if you have this dopey bet din who intercalated on the 30th and also sanctified it as the 1st of Nisan, the whole thing falls apart and it's not an intercalation. The intercalation is invalid. It doesn't work. Rav Nachman, on the other hand, says the opposite. Mu'ubar, it is intercalated, Umukudash, and it is also considered to be Rosh Chodesh. And so you end up having the month sanctified on the 30th of Adar and intercalated on the same day. And there is a machloket in halacha, and you can see it on the right-hand side there, as to what the actual halacha would be. Doesn't apply to us anymore, of course, because we have a fixed calendar. Since the 4th century CE, Hillel fixed the calendar forevermore. We no longer rely on witnesses. We no longer rely on sanctification of the new moon by the bet din, and we no longer rely on intercalation by the bet din either. But at that time, the halacha was a machloket between the two of them. So that's the situation at the moment. Rava says it doesn't count. Rav Nachman says it does count. And now we're going to have a bit of an interchange between Rava and Rav Nachman, and to see, one of them is trying to understand why the other one's opinion is as it is. Amalei Rava Rav Nachman.
Sorry,
Rava,
John.
Yes, go on, Leslie.
Sorry, can I ask a question? I'm a bit confused. So if they've intercalated correctly on the 29th of Adar, and therefore we have a second Adar, as I understand it, where I'm confused is what happens to Purim, because presumably they've already celebrated Purim in Adar Rishon, and then what happens when we've got this correct Adar bet? Do we have Purim again? We can't have Purim again.
Okay, so the reason you asked that question is because you joined the shiur, I think, just after we'd had this discussion a few weeks ago in the Gemarah itself, because what we learned was that the ideal time to intercalate the year is between the 1st of Adar and Purim.
Sure.
So that you don't have exactly the scenario you've just said.
Yep.
You are allowed to intercalate it right up to the end of Adar. But the correct and most best time to do it is before Purim, because exactly because of that. What you don't want to do is celebrate Purim and then do it all over again the next month.
Yeah.
But in the event that we do exactly what you've just said, which is intercalate any time after the 14th of Adar up to the 29th, then we have Adar Bet and we do Purim all over again.
Oh, okay.
That's exactly what we do. So your question is a correct question.
Okay, thank you.
And the answer is we try and avoid it, but if we can't avoid it, we do Purim again. Now, that question was very apt because Rava and Rav Nachman are going to talk about Purim and Pesach together now. We're over here. Amalei Rava la Rav Nachman. Rava said to Rav Nachman, Michti, since, now, hear me out, he says, Mi Puria lefischa, these are Aramaic words. Puria obviously is Purim. Pischa is obviously Pesach. So, Mi Puria, from Purim lepischa to Pesach, Klatin Yomin Havu. Now, in Aramaic, Shin and Taf are interchangeable. You often find they are changed over. So this word Talatin, if you interchange those letters Taf into Shins, what will you get?
Shaloshim.
Shaloshim, correct, which means, Johnny?
30.
Correct. So, Rava says to Rav Nachman, now hang on, mate. From Purim to Pesach, Latin Yomin Havu. There are 30 days, correct? 30 days between Purim and Pesach. We're not learning anything new there. Date of Purim is the 14th of Adar. The Korban Pesach is offered on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan, 30 days later. Okay, very good. So what? Therefore, says Rava, Umi Puria darshinan behilchot haPesach. From Purim onwards, we will be giving droshes and learning Hilchot Pesach, the halachot of Pesach. Now, we know that, don't we? Because that happens in our day as well. As soon as you've finished one Chag, you start learning about the next one. Last night in Shul between Mincha and Mariv, the night before, after Lag BaOmer, as soon as Lag BaOmer was done, between Mincha and Mariv, I started to learn the halachot, or the minhagim of Shavuot, because that's what's coming up next. There is a famous idea which the Gemarah now is going to quote. The Gemarah is going to quote a Braita, and many, many people know this. Ditanya, we have learned in a Braita, Shoalin behilchot haPesach kodem la Pesach shloshim yom. You start to ask questions about Pesach 30 days before Pesach. And that is translated into a very strong minhag that 30 days before Pesach, we start having drashot, shiurim. We start learning about all the Hilchot Pesach. Why, particularly with Pesach, more than the other Chagim? Well, quite simply because Pesach has got a load more difficult and different halachot connected with it. And of course, because keeping or eating chametz is such a very strict forbidden act, we have to be very, very careful with it. And so we need 30 days of studying of the halachot to make sure that we don't get it wrong. And that, of course, 30 days begins from Purim, because Purim is 30 days before Pesach. So Rava says to Rav Nachman, right, Purim is 30 days before Pesach. And we know that we start learning the halachot of Pesach 30 days before. Therefore, that means we start learning the halachot of Pesach on Purim. Okay. By the way, the Gemarah says, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel does not agree. And he says, Shtei Shabbatot, 2 weeks is enough. You don't need a whole month to learn all the halachot. 2 weeks is enough, says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Yes, Sharon's got her hand up.
I was just to ask the question, where did the 30 days come from? And was it really only to talk about the strict observance of how to rid yourself of chametz, or was it really to begin talking about the themes of Passover and to get us ready to actually leave Egypt?
Very good question. And I think that the answer is both, in that in practice, because of the very nature of Orthodox practice, and because Pesach is so full of different and difficult halachot, and because Pesach is an obsessive's delight, that people get very, very hung up, if you like, on the minutiae of Pesach. And so there are a lot of people who spend 30 days going into the minutiae of the halachot of Pesach, and perhaps don't spend enough time or any time thinking about the themes of Pesach until right on the night of Pesach, and there we've got the Haggadah in front of us and we haven't done any work on it. On the other hand, there are other people who will use that time for contemplation about what Pesach is all about, really what the theme of Pesach. The ideal, of course, is to do both. And it will all, what a person does with those 30 days of study, I guess, will reflect their own personalities and their own particular preferences. But there's no question, I think you're right to point that out, that it's not just about the halachot, although that does form a very large part of it. Yes, Leon.
No, I was just saying Beverly's phone just went. Sorry.
Oh, right. Okay. So why is Rava getting upset about this to Rav Nachman? Why is he saying this to Rav Nachman? Because he goes over here. V'chi mate rosh resh yarcha. And when Rosh Chodesh comes, you can see Resh Yarcha is Rosh Chodesh. Resh, you can see, is the same word as Rosh. And Yarcha, why is Yarcha a Chodesh, a month? What's the word? What's the root of that word?
A moon.
Yerach is the moon,
Yeah,
correct.
moon.
Yerach is the moon. So Resh Yarcha is the beginning of the moon, in other words, Rosh Chodesh. And when the new moon comes along, in other words, when it's Rosh Chodesh, Merachakinle, what happens is, can you see the word rachok in the middle of that word? Rachok means distance. And then this is a verb, merachkinle. It becomes distance. We actually distance ourselves from it. And so what happens is that because Rosh Chodesh comes along, we've been already spent the last 2 weeks talking about Pesach. We then distance Rosh Chodesh and we don't believe them. Somebody comes along. What happens is the Bet Din in Yerushalayim makes a decision that this is going to be an intercalated year. They send out messengers. By the time the messengers get to the various places, the people who were pretty ignorant have already been learning about Pesach for 2 weeks. And so they come along, the messengers, and say, we've got an extra month. It's not Pesach now for another 6 weeks. And what happened was the people didn't believe them. They thought these messengers were trying to fool them and trying to make them make mistakes. Now, why would people think that they were trying to do that? Well, I'll tell you that in a minute. So what they were frightened of is that they wouldn't believe them, and therefore they would keep Pesach when really they should have been keeping Purim. They should have been doing Purim again, right? They should have been doing Purim on the 14th of Adar Bet. They didn't believe there was an Adar Bet because I've already been learning about Pesach for 2 weeks, which means that Pesach must be in the next 2 weeks. So when it comes to the 14th, instead of keeping Purim, they were busy thinking it was the 14th of Nisan and they were getting ready for Seder night. So they got it all mixed up. And worse than that, not the end of the world if you eat matzah on Purim, but worse than that, when it really was Pesach, a month later, they think it's Iyar and they're busy eating chametz. And so they've got a big problem. So that was why that's why the Rava was upset with Rav Nachman about his opinion that the intercalation held in that scenario. Rava says, no, we do away with it because people are going to get mixed up and they're not going to believe it and they're going to do Pesach all wrong. Now, why would they not believe it? Why would they think that some messenger has come along deliberately to muck their times up? Anybody got any ideas as to why they might think that in the first place?
Wasn't there a case where they were worried about people lighting fires to say it was Rosh Chodesh when it wasn't? Yes,
quite right, Michael. Exactly that. There is a machloket amongst the various. There was a machloket amongst the various sects of Judaism. The Sumerians, the Shomronim, and the mainstream Jews as to the validity of the oral law and the interpretation of the written law. So, for example, we were talking about this last night actually in shul, and it's very apt because we're in that period of the moment. Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. Now, when do we start counting the Omer? When does the 49-day count start?
Second night of Pesach. Second night of Pesach.
The second night of Pesach. Why? What does it say in the Torah?
Yes,
go on, Johnny. Absolutely right. Uspartem lachem. You shall count for yourselves.
Macharat HaShabbat.
Macharat HaShabbat. From the day after Shabbat. Geva Shabbatot Tamimot. 7 full weeks. Now, if I were to ask you, in any other context, what day is Macharat HaShabbat? What day is the day after Shabbat?
Yom Rishon.
Yom Rishon, Sunday. When do we start counting the Omer? What day of the week?
Varies.
Correct. Depends what day Pesach is. Now, the Shomronim looked at that pasuk and said, which of these words do you not understand, numbskulls? Usfartem lachem, you shall count for yourself, mi mocharat ha-Shabbat, from the day after Shabbat. Clearly, that's talking about Sunday. So they start counting the Omer from Motzei Shabbat of Chol HaMoed Pesach. Right? So whatever day of Pesach Chol HaMoed Shabbat is, of Chol HaMoed, that's when they start counting the Omer. If there isn't a Shabbat Chol HaMoed, like there wasn't this year, why was there no Shabbat Chol HaMoed this year? Because the first day of
Yom
Pesach,
Tov, because Yom Tov was on Shabbat.
Correct. The first day of Pesach, Yom Tov itself, was Shabbat. So this year would be in agreement because they would also start on the second night of Pesach because that happened to be on the day after Shabbat, on the Motzei Shabbat. But any other year where there is where Yom Tov day is not Shabbat, would be out of sync. And so there was a big machloket, a big disagreement about this. And of course, there's huge implications because the Torah does not tell us the date of Shavuot, does it? It doesn't. It tells us the date of Pesach, tells us on the 15th day of the month, or the 14th day of the month in the afternoon, you shall take the Korban Pesach. And the next day shall be, i.e. the 15th, shall be Yom Tov. Same with Rosh Hashanah. It tells us very clearly on the first day of the 7th month. Yom Kippur tells us very clearly on the 10th day of the 7th month. Sukkot, the 15th day of the 7th month. But Shavuot, it does not tell you the date of Shavuot. Why not? Why not? Because we know. We don't need to be told. We know you've got to count 7 complete days. Sorry, 7 complete weeks. 7 complete weeks from when? Well, that depends, doesn't it? If you're a Shomroni, it's 7 complete weeks from the day after Chol HaMoed Shabbat. If you are not a Shomroni and you are a mainstream Prushi, a Pharisite, as opposed to a parasite, then you would count it from Motzei Yom Tov, like we do. And then we get to the 6th of Sivan. So Shavuot for the Shomronim is a moving feast because it depends on when Chol HaMoed is. So they would say, well, look, the fact that the Torah does not tell us what date Shavuot is our proof that we're right. Because it can't tell us what date it is because it moves around. Depends on what day Shabbat is. We're right, says Mimocharat Shabbat. Why are you being, why are you saying that it's not? And we say the reason that it doesn't say the date, it's because it doesn't need to, because we can work it out that 7 weeks from the first day after Yom Tov. And we say, they say, why are you saying Yom Tov? It doesn't say Mimocharat Chag, it says Mimocharat Shabbat. And so we say, well, that's what the oral law is all about. We were told orally that means Shabbat means a Chag. So, and of course, they don't believe in the oral law, and that's where this whole argument came from. So there was this bit. Why am I telling you all this? Apart from the fact that it's interesting, I'm telling it you because there was a massive fight about all of this, and the Shomronim used to try and muck up the calendar of the Perushim. So when the Bet Din would announce Rosh Chodesh, how did they get the messages out to the distant communities? They had a system of fires, right? And if you look in the Mishnah, it tells you exactly where these fires were on the hilltop. It was smoke signals, basically. You light a fire on a certain hill. The next hill would be waiting for it to see. They knew more or less when Rosh Chodesh was because they could count to 29 and they could see the moon. So they were waiting for the Bet Din to announce it. They saw the fire. They quickly made a fire, and then the next hill saw it. And then very, very quickly, with these smoke signals, the message got out that it was Rosh Chodesh. That was the original method of transmitting the news that it was Rosh Chodesh. Okay, that was the equivalent, I guess, of a chain email today, right? Or a forwarding a WhatsApp. These fires. So what happened was the Shomronim, they sent out spam. They sent out spam fire signals, okay, just to muck it up. They sent fire signals. They started lighting fires when it wasn't Rosh Chodesh to muck up the system. And the Mishnah tells us very clearly that once they started doing that, the Bet Din had to change the method of transmission of the news that it was Rosh Chodesh, and instead of making fires, they sent out messengers. Well, it wasn't then, because they were sending out messengers, the whole reason they were sending out messengers was because there was this whole business of trying to fool people and get people to do it wrongly. The messengers went out and people didn't always believe them because they thought Shomronim had sent out false messengers. How do I know that this is a real message from the Bet Din? How do I know that this isn't a Shomroni false messenger? How do I know that this isn't an email that's come trying to scam me, right? So that's why Rava says, no, there's a decent chance that these people are not going to believe the messengers because they've already been learning about Pesach for 2 weeks. They know that you don't normally intercalate a month before after Purim. Normally you would intercalate before Purim for the reason that Leslie said earlier on. You certainly don't leave it to the last minute. And we're all very knowledgeable people. We know that you don't intercalate on the 30th of Adar. So when this message comes and says we've intercalated, we're saying, no, I don't believe you. You must be a Shomroni. You're trying to cause me aggravation. Don't believe you. You're trying to make me break Pesach. And so there'll be all sorts of confusion. Some people will believe them. Some people won't believe them. And you'll have Pesach being celebrated in different times, in different places. And it will all be a big balagan. So Rava says to Rav Nachman, remember, Rav Nachman is the one that says, if you've got a dopey Bet Din and they intercalated and they sanctified the month, we keep it, even though they've done it wrong. Rava says, no, you can't do that because you'll end up with a complete balagan about Pesach. And that's Rava's argument to Rav Nachman. He says, V'chi mate Rosh Yarcha, when along comes this extra month, Marach Kinle, and you're distancing that learning of Pesach, which you've already been at for 2 weeks, Ate lezalzule bechametz. What will happen is people will come and will eat chametz when they shouldn't do, believing that they've been tried to be duped about when Pesach is. And the truth is they don't really know when Pesach is anymore. They're completely, utterly confused by the whole thing. So Rava says we can't allow that scenario to ensue. So if we have this dopey Bet Din, we annul the whole thing, forget it. There's no going back. Once you've hit the 30th of Adar, that is it. There is no more intercalation. So you'll tell me, well, we need to intercalate because of all the other things. Well, you've missed the boat, mate. You'll have to do it next year, according to Rava. Okay. So what's, without looking, I'm not going to take it off the screen. What, if you were Rav Nachman, what would you answer Rava in I think it's rather a good question of Rava's. How would you answer Rava if you were Rav Nachman? Any offers? All right, let's have a look and see how Rav Nachman answers. Amalei, he said to him, who said to who? Rav Nachman said to Rava in reply, Meida yadi de shata ma'abarta de chushbana talia milta. So a lot of as there. That's the way Aramaic is. And he says basically his answer is you underestimate the people. The people know, the people understand that they're not stupid. People understand that it's not a simple thing, this intercalation business. All sorts of things have got to be taken into account, the rainfall and the produce and checks and balances have to be put. We know it takes time, it's a complicated business. And so if it works out, Amri, they will say, Chushbanahu de la salik lahu l'rabanan ad hashta. They were just they were delayed. They hadn't got their calculations done in time. And yeah, we know that really they should have got this done before Purim, but it was complicated. We understand that the Bet Din had a lot to do. They were busy, you know. They were busy with Purim and sending out Mishloach Manot and dressing up and all that business, and they didn't have time. They were busy. We understand this. It takes time. If the messenger comes and says they're from the Bet Din, we understand that's a possibility. We're not going to be thinking that it's a Shomrani, and we would believe them, and all would be well. So Rav Nachman says you don't have to worry, Rava. You don't have to worry that people are going to think that they're trying to be duped and everything will be mucked up. No, the people know. The people understand what is going on, and you can rely on their intelligence and their knowledge that they won't do that. And you know what? Worst scenario is they'll do it twice. They'll do Pesach and they'll do Purim, and and everything will be fine. Rav Nachman is not worried about what Rava is worried about. Okay, we've now come to an S, so we need to stop there because we're almost out of time.
Can I just make a comment? Sorry.
So we're now open to comments and questions. Yes, Julia.
Well, I mean, I've read the notes, and it seems to me that Rava's argument is much more justifiable, but the reason that it's not accepted is really because he was a student and Rav Nachman was the teacher, and apparently the Rambam supports Rav Nachman, and yet it's not really, you know, I don't know if it was your emphasis, but your emphasis made a really good case for what Rava said, and Rav Nachman's denial was not that convincing.
Yeah, well, possibly I intercalated my own views, because I agree with you, Julia. I actually think that Rava's argument is a strong argument. Again, I think I like Rava's argument because it enabled me to bring in the historical issues of the machloket between the Shomronim and the Perushim, which you need to know to understand Rava's argument. So I agree with you. I think that Rava's argument is stronger than Rav Nachman's, and specifically with Pesach, when we, of course, are all obsessive about being strict about everything to do with Pesach, even to the minutest amount of stuff that might possibly have come into contact with kitniot somewhere along the line, and we run away from it all in ridiculous obsessive compulsive behavior. You would expect that Rav Nachman would be worried about what Rava would be worried about. I certainly would be, but that may well be my sort of conditioning because of the obsessive nature that we all deal with Pesach in. But I agree with you, Julia. I think Rava's is a stronger argument. And I was also surprised to find that the Rambam paskin like Rav Nachman. But I suppose thinking about it, Rambam was quite a controversial figure. I think if Rambam had been alive today, I think we could have enlisted him into Chelet. I think he would have appreciated the approach that we are taking to try and bring things into a modern approach. He was a real rationalist. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that he goes with a more rational view of things. But yeah, There you go. That was interesting comments. Leon.
Yes, when I was looking at this before the shiur, I was quite amazed. I thought that you were just, Johnny Lieberman giving shiurim to us ignoramuses who don't understand Ivrit, so I've got to have shiurim in English. But in fact, you're carrying out what used to be done thousands of years ago as a normal thing. As soon as Purim was over, or right by Purim, or maybe 2 weeks before Pesach, you'd start giving, they used to start giving lectures on Pesach. And the same applies to other Chagim. So I was quite taken aback. It's a thousands of years old traditions. Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely right, Leon. The tradition of learning on a cyclical basis is very, very well established. We throw into that mix as well Shabbat HaGadol, the special drasha that the Rav used to give on Shabbat, or still does, on Shabbat HaGadol, was always split into, and this goes back to Sharon's point actually, the Shabbat HaGadol drasha, which was one of the two sort of highlight drashot in the rabbi's calendar of many years ago. The other one being Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. By the way, in the United Synagogue, of course, it was always Kol Nidrei and Yom Kippur Musaf, because those were the biggest audiences of all the people that only ever went on Kol Nidrei or Yom Kippur. But in the more sort of Orthodox communities, the two big days of the year that the rabbi would spend many hours preparing would be Shabbat HaGadol and Shabbat Shuvah. Now, Shabbat HaGadol, which is the Shabbat before Pesach, the drasha was traditionally very long for a start, which is one of the reasons it was called Shabbat HaGadol, because the drasha was Gadol or Gdolah, it was long, but it was split into two parts. And this comes back to what Sharon was saying. There was always a halachic part, which would go into the details of certain halachot of Pesach that rabbi in that particular community felt needed to be emphasized. In other words, there was a teaching of the halacha that was relevant. And the second part was agadah, was stories, was to get people into the mood of the theme of Pesach. So it was exactly that the Shabbat HaGadol drasha was, if you like, the culmination of these 30 days of learning. And I think, thinking about it now, Sharon's point is absolutely spot on, that it needed to be both of those. And the fact that the Shabbat HaGadol drasha was traditionally split into two sections, the halachic section and the sort of encouraging about the theme section, I think it reflects the correct way to have done that 30 days. So, we are indeed carrying on thousands of years of tradition. And I think, that's what makes it so wonderful. And the fact that we're doing it here in the Holy Land, that extra sort of spice, if you like. Any other questions or comments?
So just previously, Johnny, when you mentioned, only on a technical point, the word for Pesach in Aramaic and Shloshim in the Talmud, the next in the Brisa, it uses the word Pesach and Shloshim. Why is that?
The Brisa is in Hebrew.
Because
the Brisa,
they learn in Hebrew in those days.
This Brisa is in Hebrew. If you look at the Mishnah is written in Hebrew. Gemarah is written largely in Aramaic. So here, Tanya, we're quoting a Brisa. Some brises were in Aramaic, but some brises, remember we said that the brises were often the offcuts that never made it into the final version of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah was written in Hebrew. So you do find many brises that are in Hebrew. And this one is, as you say, is clearly in pure Hebrew, which does make it easier for folk like us to understand. But the folk back then would have understood the Aramaic much better than the Hebrew. Hebrew was the language of scholarship and of prayer. It was too holy a language to be used as the vernacular, which is another, by the way, just as an aside, another one of the objections that many of the Haredi population object to is that we have, according to them at least, bastardized the holy tongue and made it into an unholy tongue, and that Hebrew should be Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, and not a language which is used yom yomi, every day. It should not be in the vernacular. So there is that concept that Hebrew is the language of holiness, Aramaic was the vernacular, and discussions took place in the vernacular.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, just I can stop the recording, please, Avril.
Johnny, one question.